A police dog lunged at a casket in the middle of a quiet chapel. No one understood why, until they opened it. What they discovered left the entire room frozen in silence. Could a dog sense what no human ever could? But real quick, drop your dog's name in the comments and hit that subscribe button. Rain tapped gently on the roof of the chapel in Stillwater, Minnesota, as the small congregation filtered in. It was one of those overcast spring mornings when time felt slower and every sound seemed louder. The kind of morning when grief hung heavier than the clouds. The ceremony was for a man named Roger Dale Whitman, a retired firefighter known across town not just for his years of service, but for the way he rescued animals, especially dogs, from burning homes and dangerous roadsides. At 68, Roger passed suddenly in his sleep, and despite his humble lifestyle, the chapel was packed. Everyone in Stillwater seemed to owe him something, or at least remembered someone who did. A closed casket stood at the front of the room, modest and plain. It was made of light oak, the kind Roger had once said reminded him of the trees on his childhood farm. A small bouquet of wildflowers rested on top, wilted just slightly from the damp morning air. But what made this ceremony different from the usual quiet grief was the presence of a single working dog near the back of the chapel. His name was Gunner, a German Shepherd in full canine uniform, and something about his behavior had already unsettled several guests. Gunner was not just any dog. He had been Roger's last rescue, pulled from a collapsed building 3 years ago, and later trained as a police canine with the help of Roger's quiet determination. The two were inseparable. After Gunner joined the force, Roger retired fully, watching proudly from the sidelines. This morning, Gunner had come with Officer Matt Reynolds, his handler. But from the moment they stepped inside the chapel, something in the dog shifted. His calm, obedient demeanor was replaced with an edge that Matt had not seen in months. Gunner growled softly near the doors, then locked his eyes on the front of the chapel, specifically on the casket. Matt tried to calm him. A firm hand, a quiet command. Nothing worked. Gunner sat stiff, ears high, pupils narrowed. His breathing grew louder, chest rising and falling as if he sensed something far beyond human comprehension. The preacher cleared his throat to begin the ceremony, but Gunner's growls grew louder. Heads turned. The silence stretched. Officer Matt leaned in again, whispering to his partner. Gunner did not move. Instead, he stood, pulled slightly on the leash, then stopped, as though waiting for something. The first eulogy started. A woman from the fire department described Roger's bravery, how he once carried a man through a window of a burning house on Christmas Eve. People nodded, some wiped tears, but Gunner was not moved. He tugged harder, then barked once, loud, sharp. It echoed off the stained glass windows and made half the chapel jump in their seats. The preacher paused mid-sentence. Matt gave a quiet apology to the mourners, then began to walk Gunner toward the back doors to remove the distraction. But Gunner jerked hard in the other direction, toward the casket. It took all of Matt's strength to hold the leash. The German Shepherd barked again, this time with intensity that made several guests rise from their seats. His body was tense, tail straight, eyes fixed on the box at the front like he saw something no one else could. That was when everything changed. Gunner let out a different kind of bark, not aggressive, but urgent. He crouched slightly, a stance used when signaling detection. His nose pointed toward the casket. A murmur spread across the chapel. Some guests exchanged concerned glances. Others stood frozen, trying to make sense of the scene. Matt's heart sank. This was not misbehavior. Gunner had shifted into alert mode, something trained and precise, something used for search, for detection, for danger. The preacher stepped back from the podium. A man from the fire department rose and walked to Matt. "Is this normal?" he asked. Matt shook his head slowly. "Only when he finds something, or someone." There was a moment of frozen indecision, the kind where no one wants to move because any action might validate their worst fear. But Gunner offered no time for contemplation. He lunged, not in aggression, but in purpose. He pulled Matt forward fast and sure, and the officer had no choice but to follow, down the aisle, past the mourners, directly to the front, straight to the casket. He stood beside it, ears locked, nose close. Then he barked again, twice, short and hard. The chapel turned dead quiet. Matt's mind raced. Gunnar was trained to detect explosives, narcotics, even cadaver scents. But never had he alerted like this at a funeral, not at a sealed casket, not at a ceremony full of people. "Is it possible?" a voice in the back asked, but no one finished the sentence. Officer Matt looked around, then toward the family, whose expressions ranged from confusion to sudden concern. A woman near the front, Roger's niece, covered her mouth. The elderly man next to her leaned closer, whispering something with trembling lips. Matt turned to the preacher. "We need to check." The preacher hesitated, but he was embalmed, transported, certified. The casket was sealed yesterday. "I know," Matt replied, "but Gunnar is not wrong." The room remained still, as if time itself was holding its breath. Finally, with nods from the family and a quiet word from the funeral director, the room was cleared. Mourners shuffled slowly out to the lobby or out under umbrellas. Whispers filled the air like static. What was going on? Why did the dog do that? What could be in there? Inside the chapel, only a handful remained. Officer Matt, the funeral director, 2 fire department members, and a detective who had arrived when word spread about Gunnar's behavior. The funeral director hesitated near the casket. "You sure this is necessary?" he asked. Matt pointed at Gunnar, now seated, but still locked onto the casket like gravity pulled him toward it. "Yes, open it." The room watched in tension as the clasps were unlocked and the lids slowly lifted. And there, lying peacefully, was the body of Roger Whitman. Dressed in his firefighter uniform, eyes closed, hands crossed, just as he had been prepared the day before. Nothing looked unusual, nothing obvious, but Gunnar began to whine, soft, high-pitched, painful. His body leaned forward, nose hovering not over the chest but lower, toward the stomach area, toward a small lump beneath the uniform's fabric. Matt's heart skipped. "Lift the shirt," he said. The detective hesitated, then carefully reached forward, undoing the buttons of Roger's uniform jacket. Beneath it was a clean white undershirt, and below that, something that was not part of any embalming process, a bulge. The detective slid on gloves and slowly lifted the undershirt. There, taped carefully against Roger's abdomen, was a bundle. Thick, wrapped in plastic, and unmistakable to anyone with law enforcement experience. It was a package, a sealed brick, marked with faded tape, the kind commonly used in narcotic smuggling. No one spoke. The detective reached for his radio. Matt stepped back, his thoughts racing, his hands cold. Gunnar stood now, staring not at the casket but at Matt, waiting, as if he had done what needed to be done, and now passed the burden on. Matt whispered under his breath, "What the hell is going on?" The silence returned, but not the peaceful kind. It was a silence now charged with mystery, a silence that asked far more questions than it answered. How did this package get into Roger's casket? Why had no one noticed before the funeral? And most of all, why did a police dog seem to know the truth long before any human did? As the medical examiner was called and the room was cleared for investigation, Gunnar finally sat down beside the empty podium, quiet, still, as if for the first time since the morning began he could finally rest. But Matt knew this was far from over, because now everything about Roger's quiet death had changed, and Gunnar, the rescue, the partner, the silent witness, was the only one who had seen it coming. Rain still fell outside the chapel, but now it mixed with flashing red and blue lights. 2 squad cars, a coroner van, and an unmarked detective vehicle lined the otherwise quiet parking lot of Stillwater Memorial. What had begun as a simple funeral had spiraled into an active investigation. Officer Matt Reynolds stood under the chapel stone awning, Gunnar at his side, soaked from earlier chaos. The dog sat calm now, steady but alert, watching every movement as investigators entered and exited through the chapel side entrance. Inside, Roger Whitman's casket had been moved to the back of the room, surrounded by evidence markers and cameras. The brick of narcotics recovered from Roger's body was confirmed. High-grade heroin wrapped in double-layered plastic and medical tape. Street value estimated near $70,000. That kind of packaging was not done in back alleys or by amateurs. It was the kind used by cartels or highly organized rings. But why would it be inside the casket of a retired firefighter known for rescuing animals and saving lives? Matt leaned on the edge of the stone railing, eyes scanning the horizon beyond the graveyard. Nothing made sense. He had known Roger personally, not just through the community but through Gunnar. Roger had saved the dog during an apartment collapse 2 years ago and later helped with the initial training after Matt adopted Gunnar from the rescue program. Roger was clean, a widower, no children, lived alone in a simple house with no signs of wealth, secrets, or vices. Detective Laura Pierce approached from behind. She had joined Stillwater PD from Chicago 4 years ago and carried a reputation for digging deeper than most. She stopped beside Matt, her coat soaked near the edges, not that she noticed. "2 questions," she said, staring out at the rain. "1, how did it get past embalming?" Matt shrugged. "I asked the same thing." Pierce pulled out her notepad. "Preliminary from the ME says the injection points were clean. He was embalmed, no doubt, but the abdomen was padded in a way that would make the bulge look natural. Slight belly distension common in some older bodies. The mortuary didn't raise a flag." She looked at him. "Second question, why him?" Matt stared forward. "That's the part keeping me up." Inside the chapel, the medical team had finished. The brick was collected, sealed, and ready for forensic testing. But the bigger storm was about to come. The casket had been flown in from Denver, where Roger had passed during a visit to an old friend. The body had been prepared by a private mortuary there. The transit records checked out. There had been nothing irregular in the documentation, which meant someone along that path had turned a dead hero into a smuggling tool. Pierce flipped her notes. "The mortuary in Denver is private, small staff. If someone slipped it in there, it had to be someone with either full access or someone paid off." Matt nodded slowly, and whoever it was, they must have thought no one would ever check or suspect. Gunnar shifted his body weight slightly, eyes locked on a man being questioned near the entrance of the chapel. It was Thomas Rayner, Roger's former captain at the firehouse. Thomas had been one of the first to arrive at the funeral and seemed genuinely devastated when Gunnar first alerted. But now his hands were shaking in a way Matt had not noticed earlier. Gunnar's ears tilted, not aggressive, not in warning, just watching. Matt followed his partner's stare. "Thomas?" he asked quietly. Pierce looked over. "What about him?" "He was the one who organized the service. Said Roger always wanted to come home. Said he was the only one left to do it." Pierce wrote something. "You think he knew something?" Matt hesitated. "I think he knows more than he's saying." Meanwhile, inside the chapel, another officer flagged Pierce down. A laptop had been recovered from Roger's personal belongings, sent ahead in his suitcase. It was locked, but digital forensics had already started running recovery tools. The preliminary findings were strange. Folders labeled with numbers, password-protected PDFs, files with long timestamps and strange naming patterns. None of it looked like the normal desktop of a retired man who volunteered at the animal shelter. Pierce pulled the screen toward Matt. One open document caught his eye. "Asset drop, 11th Ave, use confirmed, quiet only, no route repeat." The language was off. It read more like a message used in covert communication. Pierce turned to him. Either Roger was helping someone or he got pulled into something big. Matt looked at Gunnar, then back at the screen. If he knew, I think he was trying to expose it. Later that afternoon, Matt drove out to Roger's home. It was a single-story house nestled near the tree line, quiet and untouched. The lawn was overgrown by a few inches. A single flag hung limply from the porch railing. The neighbors said Roger kept to himself. A few weekly visitors, nothing strange. With Pierce's clearance, Matt stepped inside. Gunnar followed, nose twitching the moment they entered. The inside of the house was simple. Framed certificates from the fire department, A shelf filled with photos. Roger with his late wife, Roger with rescued dogs. In one picture, he stood proudly beside a younger Matt, with Gunnar sitting between them. But in the corner of the living room, tucked beneath a cabinet, Gunnar stopped. He let out a low huff, then scratched lightly at the wooden base. Matt crouched, pulled back the rug. A thin panel, hidden but not locked. Inside, a box, flat, lined with dust, and a weathered notebook. He opened it. Inside were names, dates, street corners, notations, and one word repeated several times: drop. It became clearer. Roger had been keeping tabs, possibly on someone, possibly on a pattern. He was mapping something. He had connected dots over time. Someone had been using funerals, maybe even caskets, to move product. Matt flipped a few pages. Gunnar reacted again today. That makes 2 times near the terminal. Whoever is doing this, they are not watching for dogs. That's a mistake. A chill ran down Matt's spine. Roger had trained Gunnar to sniff more than the standard narcotics drill. He had continued the training even after retirement. And he had noticed something others missed. He was documenting it, quietly, carefully, and then he died. Pierce called as Matt was leaving the property. "We found a name in one of Roger's files, cross-referenced it with Denver mortuary staff. Guess who shows up?" Matt gripped the steering wheel. "Who?" "Thomas Rayner's cousin. Works part-time transport for the mortuary. No criminal record, but he signed off on the casket transfer. He was alone with the body for nearly 45 minutes. Matt's jaw clenched. The pieces were moving. Roger may have discovered the operation. He may have kept quiet, tried to trace the route, but someone got ahead of him. Maybe he said something. Maybe he asked the wrong question. And now they had used his body to deliver the very thing he tried to stop. It was brutal, but it was clever. No one would suspect a casket, especially not of a man who spent his life saving others. Except they forgot about the dog. Back at the station, Matt laid the notebook across the evidence table. Gunnar rested nearby but watched every move. Pierce stood over the table with a pinboard behind her. Photos, names, maps. She started connecting strings. Roger's notes matched certain deliveries over the last 3 months. 3 funerals in different states. Each had unconfirmed embalming steps, all handled by the same third-party transport service. It was not just Roger. It was part of a system, and someone inside law enforcement or fire departments was likely helping cover the routes. Matt looked at Gunnar. The German shepherd, still and steady, seemed to hold more clarity than anyone else in the room. "He was trying to warn us," Matt said. "He was trying to stop this before it grew." Pierce nodded. "And you know what's strange? We only found out because a dog wouldn't stop barking." Matt placed a hand on Gunnar's back. "No," he said quietly. "We found out because a dog refused to let his partner go unnoticed." Outside, the rain finally stopped, but inside the department, the storm had just begun. Names were being traced, calls were made, teams were dispatched to Denver, and in the center of it all, between a casket, a brick of heroin, and a silent chapel, stood a dog who saw more than any human ever did. But there was one final question that still lingered unanswered. Was Roger's death really natural, or had someone ensured his silence? The final answer lay hidden in the final breadcrumb Roger left behind, and Matt had a feeling Gunnar already knew where to look. The air inside the precinct turned colder as the full scope of the operation came into view. What began as a funeral disrupted by a police dog's relentless bark had unraveled a trail spanning multiple states and involving layers of betrayal, logistics, and silence. Detective Laura Pierce stood in front of a corkboard now covered in photographs, red strings, shipping logs, and names. At the center sat one black and white portrait of Roger Whitman, retired firefighter, community volunteer, and now an unwitting centerpiece in a trafficking operation he may have tried to stop. Matt Reynolds paced slowly nearby, hands in his pockets, his gaze dropping frequently to Gunnar, who lay stretched on the tiled floor, still alert despite the long hours. The German shepherd was quiet, but something in his posture suggested he knew things were far from over. Evidence from Roger's house had yielded more than expected. Not only had he tracked suspicious deliveries and mapped their timings, but he had also hidden a flash drive tucked behind an old wall vent, protected inside a rusted key holder shaped like a fire hydrant. The contents of that drive were chilling. Videos, conversations secretly recorded, grainy footage of people loading unmarked vehicles near cremation centers, license plates captured at odd hours, spreadsheets showing shipments marked ceremonial, all linked to funeral homes, body transports, or religious dispatch services. It was not a one-off case, it was an industry, and Roger had seen the cracks. 2 weeks passed since the funeral. In that time, Pierce coordinated with federal agencies. 5 arrests were made in 3 different cities. 3 funeral homes were shut down pending investigation, and the man seen repeatedly in Roger's recordings, the one handling logistics near Denver, turned out to be Vincent Rayner, cousin of Thomas Rayner, the very man who had delivered Roger's eulogy. Thomas had since disappeared. His house was empty. His phone pinged last in New Mexico. The heat was on, but the trail was cooling. Pierce and Matt drove upstate to follow a new lead, an address buried deep in Roger's notes. It was circled twice, underlined in red, and tagged with one sentence: "If I don't make it back, start here." The road led them to an old cabin, half buried in brush just off Highway 22. The mailbox was rusted. No tire tracks, no recent signs of activity. But when Matt opened the front door with a warrant in hand, Gunnar immediately tensed. Inside the cabin, stacks of sealed packages lined the living room, tightly packed, vacuum-sealed, identical to the one hidden in Roger's casket. A makeshift operation, no cameras, no alarms, just low-tech trafficking with deadly precision. Gunnar stepped closer to the back room and stopped, staring at a pile of dusty blankets. Matt approached carefully and lifted the corner of the cloth. Underneath was a ledger, handwritten, names, routes, dates. One of them was circled: Whitman, Route 4B. Status: cleared. Pierce stepped back. They used him. They used his name as a delivery code. Matt's jaw tightened. Not just that, they labeled him cleared. That means they planned it, marked him, maybe even made sure he was never going to leave Denver. She looked at him. "You think they killed him?" Matt didn't answer right away. He remembered the medical report. Cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but the body had been cremated already after the narcotics were removed, leaving no opportunity for a second examination. Pierce whispered, "It would have been clean, no signs, maybe even poison masked as natural." And yet there was one thing they had not anticipated: Gunnar. The dog who had once been pulled out of wreckage by the very man now labeled Route 4B. The dog who had been trained by that man to sense more than commands, who had been taught to follow instinct over protocol, and that instinct had shattered the silence. Back at the precinct, news vans gathered outside as the case made national headlines. But behind the press, there was mourning. Roger had died trying to do the right thing. He had collected evidence, mapped the routes, and sent quiet warnings. The notebook, the flash drive, the address. He never confronted anyone directly. He knew the risk, so he trusted the only ally who would never betray a secret: a dog. And Gunnar, in return, had fulfilled a final promise. He had barked not out of fear, but remembrance. The town held a second memorial 2 months later. Smaller, quiet, this time in a city garden Roger used to visit. No casket, just a plaque, a tree, and a bench with his name etched beside an inscription. Some heroes save lives in silence. Others train those who speak without words. Matt stood quietly, hand resting on Gunnar's neck. The German shepherd stared ahead, eyes fixed on the bronze plaque, tail still, head slightly bowed. They did not need words. In the crowd stood a boy holding a rescue puppy, one of the dogs Roger had helped place years ago. An elderly woman who used to walk past Roger's porch every evening stopped and placed a flower on the bench. Others followed. But it wasn't closure that settled over the group. It was something deeper. A silent nod to a man who had noticed when no one else had. A man whose death exposed a network of greed. A man whose bond with a dog rewrote the ending. Later that day, Matt returned to the office. The final report was almost complete. The names arrested, the routes identified. Several agencies had begun overhauling regulation around body transport. The cracks Roger noticed were finally being sealed, but there was one more thing, one more breadcrumb. Inside the flash drive had been a final folder, encrypted. Digital forensics had cracked it days earlier. It contained a short video. Matt opened it again. On screen, Roger sat in his living room wearing a faded fire department shirt, the sunlight behind him. His voice was steady. "If this ever gets out, then I'm likely gone. I didn't plan to get involved. I just noticed patterns. Shipments arriving at odd hours, old friends visiting suddenly with strange excuses. Then one day, Gunnar barked at a passing van. A van carrying someone I trusted." He paused. I started watching, kept notes. Then I realized it went beyond one person. I'm not brave enough to confront them. I'm just trying to leave a trail. If you're watching this, you're the last stop. And if Gunnar's still around, he knows. The video ended. Matt closed the laptop, eyes burning. He turned to Gunnar, who now rested by the door. "You did good, partner," Matt said softly. The dog lifted his head. In his eyes there was something ancient, something pure. Not just instinct, but loyalty that outlasted death. In the following weeks, a small foundation was formed, the Whitman Animal Integrity Trust. It focused on supporting rescue dogs trained for advanced narcotic detection and provided funding to uncover criminal trafficking that used unseen channels. Matt and Gunnar became the face of the program, but they didn't do interviews, they didn't go on tour, they simply showed up, quietly, steadily, dog and handler. Each time Gunnar walked into a room, heads turned, not because of a badge or uniform, but because once at a funeral no one questioned, he had stood his ground, he had barked at a casket, and in doing so exposed a world no one dared to look inside. We uncover real stories where dogs are the silent heroes behind jaw-dropping moments. Hit that subscribe button and like the video so you never miss what others only find after it's too late.